Welcome to the AI and Faith podcast. We are a community of expert technologists, professionals, and faith leaders bringing the ancient wisdom of the world's major religions to the ethics of artificial intelligence. Join us on this new journey and welcome to the conversation.
Every society, every culture kind of comes to their rules in a different way, but there's a lot of benefit to having a space where you can follow the law, and the law, at least I'm certainly more familiar with the U.S. context, that there's certain legal tripwires that if you go across them, you will have some consequences. So if you are using hate speech that might make people feel unsafe, or it's discriminatory, or certainly that should have some level of moderation or some way of recourse or some kind of additional dialogue that says, hey, we're going to reevaluate this because of the additional consequences it might have.
My name is Pablo Salmones, and I will be your podcast host. Today's episode is from an event in April 2024. Today, we will be talking about the dangers of using AI to spread and generate misinformation, the importance of both companies and governments working together to address these issues, as well as how each of us as human beings can navigate through these challenging times. Listen now to our conversation. Andrew DeBerry has 16 years of experience leading new artificial intelligence initiatives and launching platforms for mixed reality at Microsoft, election security in Silicon Valley, and health innovation at Amazon Web Services. He currently leads a team for responsible AI and privacy for a social media company and serves as a reservist in the U.S. Cyber Command, introducing AI principles for the DoD. Andrew has a degree in aerospace engineering from Notre Dame with minors in public policy, Arabic, and Catholic social teaching. He gained a master's in national security studies while a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer, and completed an MBA in strategic management and MA in international studies, Arabic, from the Wharton School Slaughter Institute. Thank you once again, Andrew, so much for being here. And today we're going to talk about a topic that's just incredibly important, right? Something that's out there and that has many people believe that AI has had a significant impact on what we're going to talk about today, which is misinformation, truth, and artificial intelligence. So, Andrew, perhaps we can start with a question. Why do you think that misinformation is a particularly relevant topic right now? And how have you personally kind of experienced this phenomenon of misinformation?
Thanks so much for the connection. And underlying our communities and our experiences really is trying to find ways to help good innovate faster than evil, kind of a re-manifestation of an old scripture of not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And I think that misinformation is a really hot topic because of how difficult it is to ensure accuracy. It's the age-old question of what is truth, who decides what that truth is, and secondly, how that's coming to life in very relevant issues for our society. And so certainly elections are top of mind. We know that this is relevant in our day-to-day lives for people who are using social media. In the world of AI, it's also becoming more difficult to identify what is accurate information and what has some debate for what biases should be allowed. Also a very hot topic in our education community is certainly one of my academic communities at UPenn has struggled a great deal with this. And a lot of my friends right now are having a difficult time with how this is coming to light, given the protests and arrests and a lot of vulnerable groups feeling hurt right now. I want to clarify up front that misinformation can be inaccurate information that is getting out there. Disinformation is an intentional misleading by intentionally contorting information that people knowingly know is wrong and trying to cause some kind of damage with that. So misinformation, unfortunately, is still pervasive and still has problems as well. So it's good that we're addressing this head on.
So I think that one of the questions that is obviously around that is, all these platforms, X and Meta, Truth Social, and every one of these platforms has different guidelines, and they've got different kinds of ways of I wouldn't say regulating, but different ways of taking a look at the moderation problem and how to moderate the content that's there. So based on that and all these phenomena, particularly in this context of elections, for example, how do you think that these platforms should be addressing this issue? How should they moderate, if they should or not, perhaps all the content that's posted there? Are they responsible? Are they not? Or what do you think of that?
finding that answer is challenging, but there are some considerations to bear in mind. I mean, for better or for worse, social media is virtualizing human communities that we have in person, that we might know in our neighborhoods, and it's taken that to a whole nother scale. And there's, benefits and challenges to that. So I say that because when identifying like who should have a voice in that discussion, there's that balance, right, between of freedom of expression, but if there's a public good and safety involved, then should there be some kind of third party, some kind of objective moderation that guides what is healthy or safe to be allowed onto that platform? So that second part brings up the next question of like, well, who is the right kind of authority or the right guide? One approach in the market can be you get a group of individuals who are respected in for whatever ways, and they are objectively identifying criteria for identifying what should be on a platform or should not be. And there can certainly be a wide range of justifiable answers in that. Another one could be having an AI algorithm that en masse tries to moderate what is safe or unsafe. And we can get into details for why that is promising, but also has challenges. Could a system like that triage it so that there is a very one specific kind of authority who defines whether or not it's okay to share something on a social media platform or not? I think at a high level, pragmatically, I can share how many large organizations approach this is that there is, in fact, many groups that use an algorithm that tries to identify certain keywords or certain categories. Certain topics will be labeled as a certain category. And then depending on where that category is, it will be handled accordingly. So let's say there are elections in any given country. If there are certain statements or phrases that come up about certain candidates, it might, or actually just about elections in general, it might go through a certain kind of programmatic flow. And then if the AI can identify, okay, well, these kinds of common phrases are commonly nefarious and destructive, we will kind of automatically label that as put some kind of caution on that or restrict it altogether. And for others that may be more questionable, then they'll triage it and maybe it goes to human review. And then humans, being imperfect, and then a committee and who knows, these blessed souls behind the scenes who are really the infrastructure for what kind of communications we're allowed to have on our platform, are struggling trying to figure out, okay, well, they themselves have certain principles and some human judgment for what they decide. And then that also is imperfect. And then try to do that in multiple languages all at once, real time. These practical issues become challenging. Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to decide these regulations or these guidelines? So, and then, let's say there's a wrong decision, then do you have recourse to address that and share that? From a product perspective, that is just some of the realities of how hard it is to moderate that. But lastly, I'll share is that there was a practice that some groups have tried of having this third-party group. Of course, that gets questioned. I think there's a balance between having a platform that is known for having high-quality curated content. Let's say it's an expert network, and you can just have a reliable dialogue that for whatever reason, there's a certain group of folks that have kind of been qualified in ways that we generally feel positive about. But on the other hand, should there also be a forum where there are no restraints, where people can say, kind of express how they're thinking or feeling from the raw part of the self, and kind of thinking of the superego versus the id when it comes to Freud approaches, and that's tough. If you constrain that, then the consequences can be tough. So it's something for us to continue to reflect on, pray on together. And I think how we approach that debate is important as well.
Yeah, I think so too, Andrew. And in fact, we've here in throughout different topics, we've talked about precisely the question of who. And it also relates, as you're saying, to free speech, right? It also relates to, well, yeah, what is allowed, what is not allowed, and in the end, who will be deciding that. I wanted to ask you perhaps a further question there. In terms of free speech, for example, what's your position on free speech versus having regulations or these guidelines? What are, if any, the limits of free speech? Do people have the right to say whatever they want, even if they're influencing other people, even if they are perhaps creating damage to other people? Are there any limits to that? Should there be any limits to that? Let's leave aside right now who will be deciding that. But what do you think on that? Should there be any limits or not, and why?
I can appreciate big picture that there's that debate of, open free speech versus is having moderated for the sake of, say, public safety or for social cohesion. So I recognize there's that wide range. I do have a pretty strong opinion that there should be, depending on what's at stake and how much influence that platform can have and what the stated purpose of that platform is, that there's a level of ethics and judgment that comes in at that level. Let's say you have a very small local community kind of social network or board. It's helpful to just share thoughts and concerns that are concerning to you, just like you might have kind of levels of communication or intimacy with people in your own family. But when that can get exposure to the broader world and you're engaging with a larger community, there's different social relationships that come into play there. And so the acceleration of tough ideas that might have different kinds of consequences should be considered. And so it's funny, every society, every culture kind of comes to their rules in a different way, but there's a lot of benefit to having a space where you can follow the law, and the law, at least I'm certainly more familiar with the U.S. context, there's certain legal tripwires that if you go across them, you will have some consequences. So if you are using hate speech that might make people feel unsafe, or it's discriminatory, or certainly that should have some level of moderation or some way of recourse or some kind of additional dialogue that says, hey, we're going to reevaluate this because of the additional consequences it might have. This is certainly a hot topic, again, on the campuses that we're having right now. Is there a way to be supportive of the Palestinians in Gaza versus is there a way to articulate that in ways that don't promulgate anti-Semitism? And so it's being able to be supportive of the law and not having outright discrimination, not having people feel unsafe is ideal. But then it's just tough because there are places where people may push back and say, well, we have the right to say things that are difficult for ears to hear. So don't we also have the right to share our thoughts and opinions? My strong opinion on this is that if there are consequences on the public good, and this is drawing from a Catholic social teaching principle of concern for the common good, that if an idea or a concept that might be factually wrong does have potentially negative consequences because it might be received in a way that is not the most responsible, the moderation is a responsibility, and we should think through that more actively. So I am a vote in the camp of having qualified moderators share the guidelines and then uphold them and communicate that if people don't like that's there are reasons for the position that individual platform is taking. And when it comes to regulations, that's a different, I think there should be more openness. I mean, if the law is coming in, then there's the inherent from public policy 101s, the trade-off between freedom and security. It's important that lawmakers consider the baseline requirements for us as a society.
I wanted to start bringing the question of AI and precisely the question of regulation. I think that I don't know if you'd agree, but I do believe that one of the larger issues is kind of like the disconnection that in many places, let's not say governments, but certain members of government have about how these different technologies work and about how the algorithms work and about what algorithms mean and what algorithms can do and what technology can do as a whole. There's not a lot of connection in that sense, I believe, between the creators of these technologies and the people who are supposed or will eventually try to regulate it, right, for whatever reason. So I think that's kind of like a big lake that we have there in terms of trying to bring these people together. Do you think that there is this disconnection between, for example, those who are regulating it from a government perspective and the people creating these technologies? Do you think they should be working together, or that they are already working together? What's your perspective on that, taking into consideration precisely these regulations on generative AI, on AI as a whole, that are kind of like being implemented or thought of in different parts of the world?
Absolutely. So I'll outline three kinds of groups. It'll be, say, us as individuals, or users, or citizens, just people. Secondly, would be companies that tend to be building these algorithms. And then thirdly are these regulators. From work I've done in this space, there have been concerns from users that eventually get codified into regulations, and then that can kind of put some hard requirements on what companies should and should not be doing. So that's an interesting group of stakeholders influencing each other. And so the regulations should uphold key values for what is positive in society, while allowing space and freedom for companies and individuals to have their freedom. What can be tough is if the rules are over stringent, and that restricts freedom, and that can restrict businesses being able to do what they might have the legitimate right to explore and consider. It would be great if there could be more dialogue on this. When I worked in this space more directly day to day, it was tough to see that long-term collaboration was still an idea. And I would recommend that we should have shared dialogues and co-create roadmaps and some ways of doing dialogues and partnerships, kind of like a roadmap of a relationship. The reality is that it was often some of these dialogues have started in contention, saying, "Oh wow, there's some problems. We don't like this. We want to react right away. We want to stop that." You can hear it very clearly in the tenor of some of the testimonies that we hear in Capitol Hill with some of the tech CEOs, and as like the regulators come onto the scene and they're learning what AI is, or they're trying to figure out how some of these business models fundamentally work for companies. Some of them should really do their due diligence before they start a public congressional hearing. And they can be very aggressive and very attacking, and maybe legitimately. It's because some of these capabilities have gone beyond what was positive for social good. So now we're all reacting to this. It would be helpful, though, is let's say there can be listening sessions, there can be partnerships, there can be just discussions in the policy groups to align on what that future might look like, have more imagination. And that's where Faith and the thought leadership in this group can have more power. Is like, what does that look like? How do we have forums that ask these tough questions that say in 10, 20, 30 years, what should this balance look like? And how do we start working backwards from that grand vision, as opposed to, shoot, this is bad, let's just react. We don't really know what we're saying, and then we're just going to like attack and go back and forth. And then kind of stakeholders learn how to slip away from each other and get by with what they want, and while claiming victories that aren't genuinely making progress. So I think there's a lot of potential for a lot of thought leadership in this space. We do need like the think tanks, the education institutions, the thought leaders, students, parents, to contribute a clear point of view with facts and bold imagination, using the latest capabilities of our tools to get there.
Yeah, 100%, and precisely, and using these capabilities and using all these tools that we have and all the knowledge, I think that we've accumulated as well, and being bold with these ideas. I think that part of the discussions that we have here at AI and Faith have to do precisely with how can the knowledge, that we've gathered throughout thousands of years from many different religions, bring this ethical perspective on the use of AI, and in this particular case, the use of, or how can we better address the issue of misinformation in this particular case, given, all that background and given all that knowledge that society and that human beings have acquired throughout thousands of years, quite literally. How do you think that a Catholic or an Arabic or any other religious perspective, because there are many, of course, I don't want to reduce this to specific group, but how do you think a religious perspective can contribute to providing guidance, not only on a higher level, that is to people who are regulating and all that, but also at a lower level to people who are experiencing this on a daily basis, or experiencing misinformation on a daily basis? How do you think that religion and religious knowledge can help with that?
I love this thoughtful question. I'm going to insert where I believe religion most fundamentally is about relationship and not about rules. And so I believe that first, I'll address where it can enter the public market space, and then secondly, how it can support individuals that might be feeling that. At a high level, I really want the values of whatever faith tradition that's been shaped and evolved over hundreds, thousands of years to be very bold in their imagination. And so these values that ideally are timeless will manifest themselves over and over into the future. So hence, for me, a deep underlying belief in helping good innovate faster than evil. What does that look like? I need those thought leaders. I need the education and students and policymakers to articulate what is possible for us. And we start to point at it. Science fiction likes to enter the space, as we know, and it's interesting. But I mean, the values orientation of bold imagination, there's something about bold, imaginative faith and values that I wish there's just a lot more of. I'll push that out there. Number two is, I think faith can also sustain individuals and help them know that there is a broader truth. Parts of that truth are mysterious, that we band together, we lift up our shared human vulnerabilities and try to identify how do we hand each other along to discern what that is in a selflessly loving way, to share what those pains are, to deliberate with each other, to have honest dialogue, to understand different people's interests, to come up with very tangible recommendations. I want folks who are in the ring from the faith community understanding what a gradient descent is or why context windows for transform models is a really big deal. I need these groups to learn that language and be able to translate that to humanity and how that shapes our day-to-day relationships. Short answer is one, use those faith values to imagine what the future can look like, translate it into identify common values that resonate within and beyond a specific faith tradition. Some faiths, and I think in Eastern faiths, they're very strong at that. And then secondly, again, how can we use the values of that faith to strengthen community and to console individuals and help us be in the ring together to find practices practically that help us realize what that potential future looks like.
It's interesting because we're saying that the overall sense of a community which involves understanding and everything else is kind of like being lost up to a point, in the sense that you can see communities closing more and more and more and not, relating to other communities and relating to other human beings. And you touched on this very important point about not about rules, but rather about precisely forging a relationship, right? And forging a relationship with other people. And so how do you think that in this particular age of AI and taking into consideration the context of misinformation, how do you think that this has misinformation and AI in particular, or rather enhanced, if you will, by AI in some cases, have affected this sense of building a community? Do you think it has affected it in a way that they're more closed communities or perhaps they're more open? Or what do you think is the overall impact of AI and misinformation in the creation of communities and in the relationships that we have with other people and with other communities that have different beliefs than the ones that we hold dear?
I'm a big believer that the most effective AI tools will help us become more human. And so easy to say, but I'm a strong believer in that. And it does take people of values to recenter on those values and to be able to articulate what that vision looks like and the specific language and the practices to how to architect a future that we all believe in. That is a social calling that many people in this group share. That said, it's not that it is the only way to have community. A lot of strong opinions on this. I have some negative reactions to individuals that say oh, social media is bad, blanket statement. Look at all of the division that I experience on social media. Look at the vanity that it has caused. Look at how it hurts people's mental health. I understand a lot of that, but to me, it just also rings very reactive. There's a very powerful platform that has done a lot of good and can do even more good than what it's been done. I need the people who understand that to be very bold in believing how to leverage the tools that are at our fingertips in ways that make us more human. As an example, when I was in grad school, I went to India and I did an internship with a group that used social media for disaster response. Mushahidi in Eastern Africa leverages social medias to identify what the latest data points are after a crisis. That's really valuable. So great. What are the balances then between how much do you virtualize the human experience in virtual community? And the reality is there are many people who do this very effectively today. There's many young people that are brilliant at this. Just as prior generations to us created new ways and modalities for us to interact with each other, it didn't fully replace the ways that people had interacted before. Face-to-face conversation is still timeless and precious and valuable. And despite all of the tools that we have, that still happens every day. So okay, well, how do we balance the design of the human experience when we can virtualize parts of that? I think that there is a balance between having a social media platform or whatever it is that scales your ability to connect with other humans, but you also protect space and direct relationship for your face-to-face interactions. So I like that I can get a sense of where a number of my friends are at. And then sometimes someone surfaces something that hey, I could really use a lot of help on this specific thing right now. And then from there, it's well, I'm not going to just send you a bunch of distant messages and chats as a way to walk you through it. If it's someone who I need to show up for at that moment, I want to find a way to call them. I want to find a way to spend time with them and unlock that humanity So I think there's just a kind of just a thoughtful construct for how we balance virtualizing a community experience, but allowing that to empower the human experience that we have together.
Yeah, and you just mentioned these words of unlocking that humanity. I think that's something so relevant. And I was thinking of an example in precisely in natural disasters. People come together so quickly on social media and organizing to get people help. You were trained as an intelligence officer, am I right? And I imagine that as an intelligence officer, precisely you were trained to evaluate bias in sources and conclusions and all this. And I'm asking this precisely on the context of these different natural disasters and all that, because it turns out that in many cases, the civil society, precisely with social media, is organizing a lot faster than the government is organizing, right? To kind of like bring this help whenever there's a natural disaster, whenever there is something else. And many times, governments and I'm not, I'm not saying this as a bad thing or anything at all. I'm just saying that many people have difficulty in, when there's a natural disaster, for example, believing in the capacity to respond from the local or state or federal authorities, right? And they say, oh no, it was not that bad. The natural disaster was not that bad. But then you see a video of someone who just lost their home, right? Like you have the official information that might take into consideration a larger picture, but you also find a particular video that's, strikes you a lot as someone just lost their home, and you see that as a suffering from someone else. So how can we counter that? I mean, there's certainly many emotions there that go together with identifying bias, right? We're biased perhaps as people towards believing some people more than we believe someone else. How do you think that we can, as individuals, address that and say, okay, this might constitute a part of the truth, this might be another part of the truth. How can we put them together? How can we counter that bias and not say, oh, let's just believe everything that's coming out of an official source and let's not believe anything else, or quite the contrary, as it also happens, let's just believe that video we just saw of someone who just lost their home and say that everyone else is lying. So how do you think we can counter that bias when we encounter pieces of information that somehow don't seem to exactly match?
I love this question. It's tough. I really empathize for the individuals and the platforms and the team. Like on the product side, like I empathize for, say, the individuals at X who are trying to moderate. This was very real at the end of last week as we saw Israel do its response to Iran. And it was on X right away. We're starting to see videos pop up way before any mainstream news outlets. And it's tough. Like I just feel the individuals internally scrambling, trying to figure out, well, how do we identify, what's valid and what's not, to your point. I mean, there are some practices for how you do that. There are things like multiple verifications, or you identify the source, and then in the world of cybersecurity, you can try to identify where the signals are coming from and if they might indicate a potentially nefarious actor who has a history. So there can be ways to kind of change using like supervised and unsupervised machine learning algorithms, for example, anomaly detection, if there's something peculiar about certain kinds of sources compared to what in the past so far has been more legitimate, then you might identify that and kind of score it as a higher potential risk and then start to manually evaluate it from there. Easier said than done. So that's just practices for kind of iterating veracity of information. And that's a living process. We should continue to have active dialogues about how that works. I do want regulators, or like, I understand laws like it's already been like decided, it's being implemented, fact. But like longer term policymakers are asking themselves these thoughtful questions and hopefully engaging with the right groups who I do hope have this space and the kind of the spiritual freedom to think through how should things as we evolve. So those are just some tangible ways to help mitigate potential misinformation or blatant disinformation, so that we can verify what's out there. Should there be things that are out there that we just say, hey, this is out there? Know that if you're coming to whatever X source or X platform that we're not entirely sure what, and just lay it out there. Theoretically, you could say, yeah, that's great. But the reality is that humanity has shown itself to be able to exposing terrible things in ways that are not responsible. And if you provide a platform that kind of allows that to multiply and go quickly, that does enter into this moderation problem. I empathize for the individuals trying to shape that, but I do wish it was a more communal approach and kind of a relationship roadmap to figure out how do we address that, as opposed to like, oh, well, different platforms just come up with different answers and adds to its own controversy.
I think it's so important, right, to identify all the good that these platforms have also brought, and take action. And with this more communal approach, as you're saying, to find some ways to mitigate and verify, which I think is just very important nowadays. So I think that's definitely one of the greater challenges that we have ahead of us. What do you think? And I know it's a very broad question, but particularly in terms of misinformation and AI and faith, what do you think that the future looks like? But in the near future, what do you think that the world will look like, in, I don't know, 5 years or something? Do you think that we will have, I wouldn't say solved, but perhaps found effective ways to address the issue of misinformation with the help perhaps of AI and with the help of religion? Do you think this is a problem that will grow bigger, that will have larger consequences? What's your overall view on what's coming?
So there's a world of dystopian and utopian worlds here. And so from the dystopian world, there are books that even as highlighted in the chat here that could say that many do believe that our biggest threat to national security is not any external factor, any like nation state war, even nuclear holocaust, whatever it is, that it can unravel us from inside. So kind of semi-natural misinformation or blatantly malicious disinformation tearing us apart internally. So there's a world where that is possible. These platforms, something that we've unleashed is the ability for an idea to scale very quickly. And at first it was very cute. Post your photos, why not? Talk to grandma, great. But if you have some challenging ideas, wow, we've really unleashed a part of the human internally and given that a whole new platform. And that has shocked a number of us as we see the id part of us come to life and have a voice for that was surprising. So there's that. But I will take my own advice and boldly believe that the utopian world will become stronger. And in order for that to happen, it will take a more comprehensive group of stakeholders to be in the ring, having the dialogues with each other. And that can involve outlining what that vision looks like. Underpinning that vision will be different values that we can anchor on, whether the different faith traditions are. We all have the quest of trying to translate our specific, unique faith traditions into kind of common shareable views that we all align on. And then what are the milestones that help us reach whatever that bolder vision can look like? What does a well-architected future that amplifies human connection and human hope and responsibility with some measures for accountability? Let's imagine what that looks like. Let's write a 2-page white paper about what that can look like. And some of this, it's just early innings, where it's some fits and starts. We're going to try some things and get them wrong. There are algorithms trying to identify elections. Some of them have blatantly got it wrong. And I have friends reaching out week by week saying, wow, my account got deactivated and I don't know why. Like the algorithm knocked me out. And we will get better. I do think it takes people of good centered values to be, again, in the ring, which means learning what the latest technical capabilities are, being able to articulate it in a way that can be integrated into an organization. So we'll think about change management. It's not just the values or the technology, but how do you implement it? So consider change management practices and move the movable. What can you do today that will land? And how does that help you and your organization or your relationships or stakeholders build the processes, the momentum to get you towards that broader vision? I think that's over time there will always be areas of just an unending debate. There will always be, I think, a legitimate debate about moderation. But as we think through what does a well-designed future look like, it's just some of these mantras that we're forming now will be more evolved. And I do think we'll start to settle on some rough practices for how do we ensure accuracy of information? And if you want to have a more contentious debate, that maybe there's a space for that, but like maybe it's kind of has a different level of different size of audience you can tap into, so that it's not necessarily going to get misunderstood and things become irresponsible. You want to have like an experimentation zone or just some form where you can have a little bit more free debate. Some kind of architected future that allows these different spaces and the different levels of responsibility for those different forms, I think is something that we should think through about strategically.
As you're saying, it's what a bolder vision can look like, and we certainly need to, as you're saying, open our imaginations. And building the future takes bold people, right? It takes bold statements and bold visions, and it certainly takes a lot of imagination too. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Pablo. Thanks for all you're doing.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Stay tuned to listen to more recordings and interviews with experts from around the world. In the meantime, follow and rate our podcast on your favorite podcast platform and share with your friends. Don't forget to follow us on our social media as well. We're on LinkedIn and X. Thank you for joining us today.